We did a little tour. We talked a little bit about the materials themselves, but I wanted to talk a little bit more about specifically what the types of the materials that we would put into that environment to engage the child and pique their curiosity. What are the benefits of having these types of materials?
Well, I think one thing that some people don't know is that Montessori is such a holistic educational approach, because it's not just only on language, and it's not only on eye-hand coordination, it's got gross motor movement and practical life and lots of movement and how we are responsible in our homes. And so it's such a rich curriculum. You know that curriculum is not really maybe at home what the word you would use, but even at the 3 to 6 and in traditional, once you move up into the learning years when you actually go to school, then they have beautiful language areas and maths areas and geography and culture, and as well as all the practical life. So that's really beautiful. And the materials themselves are so important, because this is how the child remains curious and they're discovering and exploring with their own hands. And instead of the teacher telling them, it's like these beautiful materials, if you set them up like your materials are so beautiful and engaging, they can't help but want to touch them and explore them. Like when I was doing the tour, I'm like, I have to touch and explore these things.
Yeah, they're very inviting. Oh, I get a question a lot from parents, and then I read it in your book, so I guess you get it a lot too. What makes a material a Montessori material or an activity?
So usually they're made of natural materials. There's one specific thing that the child's learning to master, as opposed to some of those toys for babies, quite a lot are plastic toys, and on this side you pull something, and on this you post something, and on this, and actually the child often isn't that engaged by any of it, because they're all different stages. So we usually just focus on one aspect at a time. So that they master that, and then they can move on to the next level and the next level, and you're observing your child to see what they're interested in, and then providing an appropriate material. What else is there about? Oh yeah, often we have it so that it's set up on a tray, and so that everything that they need is at the ready. And I think that's really important, because we're trying to build independence into the children so that they feel very capable and can master it for themselves with very little help from the adult, and the adults they're observing and just stepping in when needed. So that's really beautiful as well.
Yeah, setting up for independence and setting up for success is something we talk about a lot.
Yeah.
If activity is, you're doing a gluing activity but there's no glue in the jar, we're kind of sending a message to the child that you have to go to an adult for help.
But the beauty is also really important, particularly in the toddler age, because a child doesn't come into the classroom or into your home environment going, I'm going to do the orange juicing first. They just kind of bump into a shelf and go, oh, this looks nice, and then they want to touch and feel it. But if it's not really super attractive, and I often observe in my classroom, oh, they're not really using that material, I wonder why, and then I might just change the tray or set it up in a different way, and all of a sudden it's being used, or where it is in the classroom it's not working. So or maybe it's not meeting anyone's needs at the moment, then I can take it out and bring it back at another time.
I think sometimes we forget that adults and toddlers are similar in that way. Like, we are so drawn in by beauty and attractiveness, and if we know that about ourselves, we can tweak our environments, and it can make a huge difference.
I mean, I think in many homes you have a big toy box, and then you wonder why your kids are bored, and because they just have to pull everything out and nothing's complete. Like, if you have a puzzle, then not all the pieces will be ready. And so we really take care that everything is complete and attractive, so that the child can get on and play. And we also, less is more. So we often only display really 6 activities or whatever they're working to master at that moment, as opposed to everything. Because often I'll go and visit a family, and they may still have baby toys kicking around with a toddler who's 2, and all they're doing is throwing them, and so it looks like the toddler's being chaotic, but actually the environment just hasn't been kept up to date enough. And so it'd be more fun to bring that out occasionally, and they could use them as instruments and then put them away again, but just for a very short period.
Yeah, it's funny. I have a 6-year-old and I have a 16-month-old, so I'm really glad you're here and we're talking about toddlers. But every time, we've set it all up, but time passes and things get messy and things wind up in the wrong places. And whenever we have a cleanup day, the next, if we do it in the morning, the afternoon is this magical time where everything is peaceful, and they're going and they're choosing their own, activity, and they're engaged. And it's not that we put anything new out, it's just that organization. I think sometimes that toy box ends up kind of like an out of sight, out of mind thing. Versus when it's displayed on a shelf, it kind of calls to them.
Yeah, and so I say if you have a toy box, then just use it to store things in and like put something on top. And so it's just a storage place instead. What's really interesting as well is my kids are now 18 and 17, and I thought that I would do this when they were toddlers, and I kept doing it as they got bigger, and then we really did it all the way through elementary as well, because even though each of the activities was becoming more complicated, so for example at home we have Lego, but instead of having like loads of Lego blocks, we just had one that they were working on, or some loose pieces so they could build whatever they liked, and it kept their toys so much more interesting for them, because they would be like, ooh, like you say, like this calm, like engaged thing. And I noticed when I just make a few changes in my classroom, it's like this peaceful day. They're so curious, they love exploring, and why not, and mastering as well. There's that fine balance though, because if you switch things too often, then they actually can't master it. So it's really teaching the adults to keep observing, like what are they working on, and which ones are they really spending the most time on, and getting the repetition and that deep concentration.
Also, mastery, you know, what we think of as mastery is not necessarily what they think of as mastery. So sometimes we have adults, parents from Monti Kids saying, oh, my child has mastered this because they've put the rings on the pegs and they do it perfectly. Should I take it away now? And I always say, and I don't know if you will agree with this, if they're still interested, that means they're still working on something. They're figuring something out. So as long as they're still engaged and going to it, keep it in there until they're no longer returning to it. If they're doing it well and no longer returning to it, I would say that's mastery.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember buying puzzles for my daughter, and she'd use them and work, and then all of a sudden they weren't being touched anymore. And you're like, oh, okay, that's the moment. They're not interesting. And so the longevity of some of these things is, shortened, perhaps.
Yeah. And sometimes you bring it back and they discover something new.
Yeah, and like we were saying, when our kids come and visit these environments, they're like so excited to explore them, but in a new way. So there's some toys that are just always going to stand the test of time.
Yeah.